everyone. This is Rose Horowitz. I am a Pulitzer-nominated journalist and the founder of Women to Follow. And I'm very happy to be here and proud to be here to thank you for joining me. And I'm really happy to be here to celebrate somebody new we're bringing to Women to Follow. I'm going to be talking to Jean Guerrero, who is at the Los Angeles Times as a columnist and is the author of two books, Hatemonger, which is about Stephen Miller and the Trump administration, and a memoir, Crux, that here's Hatemonger, and we'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about Crux, a cross-border memoir that she wrote about her growing up. She has a Puerto Rican mother and a father who is from Mexico, and she writes about her search for her father's past. Her father was troubled. Brilliant but troubled, and it's sort of an exploration of. She goes back to Mexico and what she finds and what she turns up about her whole layers and layers of family history. So I'm very excited. Women to Follow. I started this several years ago as an initiative to amplify the women's voices on social media. And the hashtag had a reach of 12 million in the first 2 weeks. And I followed it with profiling different women to follow. And there's a list on Twitter that's 1,800 strong. So let's welcome Jean. Hi, Jean.
Hi, Rose.
Hi. Thanks so much for joining me. I know you're in the midst of getting settled. So I know you're in transition.
Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure.
It's your birthday? You said?
My pleasure.
Oh, your pleasure. Okay. I didn't think it was your birthday too.
No. Not yet. March.
Okay. All right. Cool. So let's start. I know that in just July you joined the LA Times. Tell us about what you've been doing there.
Yeah, so I started as an opinion columnist in July. I'm writing about Latino communities. I'm writing about immigration, border issues, white nationalism, various threats to democracy. And when I started out, I was really focusing on covering the California recall election, particularly the campaign of the Republican frontrunner, Larry Elder, who happens to have mentored Stephen Miller, who I wrote my second book about. So I knew a lot about his beliefs, and I'd read his books and had interviewed him. And so I started reporting on that. And that was sort of the focus of my first few weeks there. Okay. And I've been shifting to other subjects lately.
And let's just look at a few pieces that I noticed that you've written. There's one that you wrote about how the U.S. Gun industry is affecting Mexico. Tell us about that piece.
Yeah, so I mean, I had been aware of the Mexico's U.S. gun problem for quite some time, having been reporting at the border, and then prior to that, when I was living as a foreign correspondent in Mexico City. Knew that about 70 to 90% of guns that are retrieved at crime scenes in Mexico are actually trafficked in from the United States. Mexico has some of the strictest gun laws in the world. They have only one gun store in the entire country. That gun store is heavily guarded by the military. And they only issue, a handful of gun permits a year. It's very, very strict. They do all these background checks. And yet, more than 100,000 people have died from gun violence in Mexico since 2006. And a lot of this, a vast majority of this is done with U.S. guns. And Mexico's government is now suing several U.S. gun manufacturers, accusing them of knowingly contributing to gun violence in Mexico, of knowingly targeting Mexico's market with these weapons. They cite a number of examples in their complaint that appear to be directly targeted to the Mexican market. Some rifles, some pistols that have the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata's image on it, as well as a quote in Spanish: "I'd rather live, I'd rather die standing than live on my knees." And then others, El Jefe, which means the boss, El Grito, which means the scream. So, even though Mexico does not allow these guns to be sold in Mexico, they're being targeted towards that market. So the Mexican government is suing these U.S. gun manufacturers and seeking millions of dollars in damages for that.
And how are Mexicans generally getting the weapons from the U.S.?
Well, so they're trafficked southbound through the U.S. Mexico border. They can be driven across the border in vehicles. They can be flown across in airplanes. They can be shipped across. The same ways that drugs get into the United States are the ways that the U.S. guns are getting into Mexico. I
know at customs they will sometimes, have dogs sniff and, check for drugs. How much surveillance is there to see how many guns might be going to Mexico illegally?
Well, that has ebbed and flowed over the years. Like on occasion, the U.S. government will increase resources for checking southbound flows for that and helping the Mexican government with that. The Mexican government also has resources dedicated to that as well. But it's a lot, when you go through the port of entry southbound, for example, here between the San Diego and Tijuana border, they have over the past few years built some new technology so that the vehicles are scanned when you're going southbound, but you don't get stopped and searched except very rarely.
Okay. So there's probably more surveillance of the drugs, I guess, than it sounds like, than weapons.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I just want to go back a second because I'm very sorry, but I want to give you the proper introduction. So let me tell people about you. Jean Guerrero is an award-winning journalist and author. She is an expert on immigration issues, the U.S. Mexican border, and identity politics. I talked about her books. I want to also mention that her first book, Crux, a cross-border memoir, won a Penn Fusion Emerging Writers Prize. And here's something that I thought captured some of that book in a quote. "Whenever I misbehaved as a child, my Puerto Rican abuela named the Mexican in me. My Mexican classmates called me gringa." And this is from an essay that she wrote for Pen America. I don't want to say that, you tell us the title, right? I don't know. The Spanish, "Your Mestizaje?" I don't know how to say that.
Yeah.
Okay. Is a superpower. Her report, before she joined the Los Angeles Times, her career started as a commodities reporter for Dow Jones and for the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones in Mexico City. I think from there, possibly you went on to a TV station in San Diego, and you did reporting on the American Wall, which is about the U.S. border control, and that won an Emmy for KPBS. And you also have an essay published in the Best American Essays of an anthology published in 2019. And so that's all. So let's go back to your work. So thank you very much for joining us. What I thought was really interesting about some of your writing and your journalism is that you tie it together with your background, so that in the essay about U.S. guns, you have in there that you have right in the lead in the first paragraph, you tie the problem with the U.S. guns to I guess it's a cousin, a 15 or 16-year-old cousin who was kidnapped, and that I guess his mother, who's your cousin, well, you're all cousins, is still looking for him.
Yeah, my cousin Diego, he was
Yes.
kidnapped shortly after his 16th birthday in Mexico City, or outside of Mexico City, in a place called Ecatepec.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's been 6 years, and his mom, Veronica, continues to search for him. The past few weeks, she's been searching in a place called El Gran Canal de Catepec, searching for his remains. She still holds on to the hope that he's alive. We all still do, but she's just trying to, she's following every lead that she's getting to try to find him, get some closure if that's what she needs, and it's just one of thousands of cases where people have been disappeared, and where people who have been disappeared would probably still be here if it wasn't for the problem of U.S. gun smuggling into Mexico. And it is one of those issues that the Mexican government is hoping to solve or assuage, or to decrease this problem through this lawsuit where they're suing the U.S. government, which they hope will not only decrease gun violence in Mexico, but gun violence in the United States, because they're calling on the U.S. gun makers to implement various safety measures, like putting in hidden serial numbers in the weapons, having smart gun technology where only authorized users can shoot the guns, various things that have been asked of the gun companies for years, but which they have not implemented, but which they could implement readily, and it wouldn't affect it wouldn't affect the Second Amendment. It wouldn't affect the right for Americans to own guns. It would only mean that that cartels or criminals in either country would be less likely to get their hands on these weapons to do harm to people like my cousin.
And I just curious, in your reporting, is that something that you see often, that you're bringing up, what do you hope to do by bringing your personal story into a global issue, political issue like this?
I mean, just for me, obviously, like, the political is also personal on many levels. And it was important for me to tell this story because I feel that in the United States, oftentimes when we talk about violence south of the border, it's very much treated as a subject that is innate to this country, or like it's like endemic to Mexico or to Latin America. But in reality, like, the issues that we see south of the border are very much tied up with issues here in the United States, whether that's lack of gun control, or the various foreign policies that the U.S. has in these countries. So it's just one example of trying to show the interconnectedness between the realities in Mexico and other parts of America, and the realities in the United States.
And are some of the issues at stake that the Mexican government is trying to argue with the U.S. manufacturers of ways that they could change the serial, how they could change the serial number so that not as many guns would be flooding into Mexico? Are these some of the same issues that U.S. politicians who are fighting for gun control, or community, people in America are fighting? Do they align those issues?
Yeah, some of the ones, like the ones that I mentioned. Others are sort of particular to Mexico. For example, the Mexican government is asking U.S. gun manufacturers, the ones that they're suing, to stop selling to dealers that are known to have their guns end up in Mexico, that are known to sell to straw purchasers, because there have been repeated traces. So we know, based on investigative reporting that has been done, based on investigations that have been done by the ATF, we know where a lot of these guns that end up in Mexican crime scenes are coming from. Like, we know the dealers, we know the makers, and so they're asking the U.S. gun companies, please don't, just stop selling to distributors that are known to sell to straw purchasers, that are known to sell to the cartels, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And in your piece, there's a piece that you wrote about immigration and calling for the Biden administration to reverse some of the restrictions, the detention and laws that were put in place under Obama. Can you talk about that for us?
Yeah, so this piece, Who Will Be the Champion for Immigrants in the Post-Trump Era, I wrote it because, the Trump administration spent so much time disproportionately focused on immigration, attacking immigrants, building a wall, dismantling the asylum system as we know it, gutting refugee admissions, separating migrant children from their parents. And you would think that the Democratic Party and that the President Joe Biden, who campaigned on promises of a more humane immigration policy, would similarly spend as much time, scaling this back and making reparations for the harm that was done. And unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. Biden did present an immigration reform proposal to provide a pathway towards legalization for about 11 million people who live in the United States and without documents, who have, in many cases, children, U.S. citizen children here, who have jobs. They've been here on average more than a decade. But this went nowhere, and the Biden administration decided to prioritize a number of other issues. But I've been talking to advocates who point out that if the Democrats don't focus on this now, then they're never going to do it, because if they lose control, if they lose their majorities during the midterm elections, there's just no way that this is ever going to happen. And so they've significantly decreased their asks over the months. They're now asking, instead of a pathway to citizenship, they're asking for parole, temporary parole, where people get work permits instead of green cards. Many advocates believe that this is better than nothing. Other advocates believe that this is really, just prolonging their second-class citizenship status. And so I wanted to explore, who is going to step up to be the champion for immigrant rights in the post-Trump era, the way that that Trump focused on being the attacker of immigrant rights. And so far, it doesn't appear that anybody is stepping up. I explored some of the individuals who are doing most of the legwork, but nobody appears to be making this their number one priority. There's just a number of other priorities.
Okay. Do you think this could gain some priority once the budget,
Well, that's what it needs. It needs to. Right now, they're trying to use reconciliation to include it in the Build Back Better plan. And that's basically its last chance. They keep blaming the parliamentarian, saying the parliamentarian doesn't want a change to the registry date, which is how they were initially proposing to provide a pathway to legalization. They just keep sort of passing the buck, and now this is their last ditch effort. These work permits that I mentioned. And the hope is that it'll get passed. Some people are calling on, and right now it's in the Senate, obviously, but it passed in the House. And it just depends on what happens in the Senate. And obviously you've got Joe Manchin, and you've got the moderates to think about as well. But if it doesn't happen through this reconciliation package, it's very unlikely to happen at all. And I think that this will be it'll have really negative consequences for Democrats in the midterms, because even though the Republicans are saying the opposite, that if we provide any kind of protections for the undocumented, that's going to be really bad for Democrats, I think it's completely the opposite. Latino turnout is huge for Democrats. It's getting more and more important. And this is a promise that he made to his constituents. And most Latinos know somebody who know and care about somebody who is undocumented. And so this is an important issue to Latinos. So obviously, Latinos are not a monolith. We care about many different issues, but this is a very important issue. And I do believe that it's going to just add to this sort of distrust of the Democratic Party, this disillusionment, this disappointment, and this lack of desire to turn out among Latinos if the Democrats fail to keep this promise.
There was some talk, in the last election, how the Hispanic vote is shifting somewhat, or there's some more strength among for Republicans. I know some of this might have been driven by maybe what happened in Florida, in Miami, but how big an issue do you think this? Is this going to be a big liability? Is that how you're framing this for Democrats in the next election if they don't address this issue?
I think so, because the Democrats already let immigrant communities down under the Obama administration. Like, this was a major promise to deliver on immigration reform. Mm-hmm. And, President Obama was trying to have it both ways. He was trying to please the immigrant communities and immigrant rights activists. And at the same time, he was trying to please the nativists and the xenophobes. And so he ramped up deportations to levels that we'd never previously seen, which was incredibly traumatizing and damaging to immigrant communities, and really eroded a lot of trust that immigrant communities had in President Obama. And he tried to recover some of that with DACA, providing temporary protections for people who were brought here as children. Mm-hmm. But what we've seen with that program, that basically the Dreamers are used as pawns. Like, they're just constantly, like, they're getting these protections revoked and then put back, and it's just not a program that provides a lot of a feeling of safety. And that's why a lot of advocates continue to say, like, we don't want parole, we don't want work permits, we want green cards, we want to be recognized as a part of this society in the way that everybody else is.
Okay. So the danger, I guess, it seemed worse under Trump in that, he just wanted to revoke anything to do with the Dreamer policy. And
yeah, I mean, Trump was hyper focused on terrorizing and traumatizing communities in every way that he could. The thing is that President Biden has not scaled back most of these policies. The asylum system continues to be totally dismantled. Except for if children arrive, then they do have their asylum claims reviewed. But families and adults are all, for the most part, being turned back, even if they have a fear of persecution in their home countries.
Okay. And tell us, when you approached, let me just go back a second. When you took this job at the LA Times, because your previous work, at least in journalism, seems to be, reporting. What impact did you hope to have, or what hope do you hope to have as a columnist versus being a reporter?
Well, so I'm still very much a reporter. I don't put out any columns without doing a number of the same thing that I did when I was just like a straight news reporter, mm-hmm. just number of interviews and reporting investigations, sometimes, records requests. And I'm always trying to break news at the same time as I'm writing my columns. So I'm still bringing to the table the same sort of experience that I have in the past. The main difference is I can provide a direct, opinion, my analysis, my take on issues, and I can use my voice in a way that I sort of refrained from doing in the past. Tried to always leave my emotions out of it. But having written a memoir, it just comes naturally to me to also to provide, my perspective, my personal experience, and to weave that in on occasion into the news reporting that I'm writing about.
Okay, thank you. I did some experience. I had some experience writing editorials, and I can agree that you do want to back up what you say with sources, and but I see you do that, so that's great. Do you hope you'll have more or different, more influence as a columnist?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan of the Los Angeles Times for a very long time.
Mhm.
Some of my favorite editors and reporters are there, and I think that we do some of the best reporting on Latino communities, if not the best in the country. And so I'm just super excited to be a part of that organization and to have, and yeah, I mean, I think the Los Angeles Times is just a great way to inform the public and to sway public opinion around certain issues by providing them with information about what's really going on.
Okay. And with your book Hatemonger, it seems to me that one theme in your writing is this theme of somebody being on the outside, and that you found Stephen Miller particularly interesting because here he was, he was Jewish, and he had embraced this white supremacy movement. Can you tell us about what of course he was a crazy and interesting character, so somebody to bring a lot of attention that we there should be a lot of attention to, but what fascinated you about this in starting to tell that story?
Well, I had been covering the impact of the Trump administration's immigration policies from the border from day one, because I'd started covering immigration under the Obama administration. And so I just became really curious. I had repeatedly heard the administration talking about the motivation for its policies, particularly the family separation policy, saying that this is about law and order, this is about national security, that they're only cracking down on people who are breaking the law and sneaking across the border. And I knew that that wasn't true just based on my interviews and my experiences as a reporter at the ports of entry, where I knew people who were presenting lawfully at ports of entry without breaking any laws with their children were being separated from their children in really traumatic ways for the children and for the parents. So for me, that raised the question, like, what is motivating these policies? Like, this is clearly not about national security, because this is systematically targeting, some of the most vulnerable people in our hemisphere. And so that's what led me to turn to investigate Stephen Miller. And I was particularly interested after I learned that he'd grown up in Southern California, which is where I grew up. He's a couple of years older than me, and I recall growing up in that California of the 1990s, when you had this really intense anti-immigrant hysteria in the state that is just nothing like what the state is today. But it was sort of a precursor to the anti-immigrant hysteria that we saw nationally. So I felt like it would be a really fascinating opportunity to explore Stephen Miller's early life and his formative years, and trying to understand what motivated him to design these policies and to crack down on legal immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees in the way that he was doing, and particularly as somebody who came from a family that fled persecution in Eastern Europe. I wanted to understand, how does that happen? How does somebody who comes from a family who has suffered under precisely these types of policies, this type of rhetoric that he's backing, how does this happen? And so that's what I set out to do with the book.
Yeah, I think it was. I remember what there were some really great details about his education and who was influenced by that. Um, you talked about.
Well, one of them was Larry Elder, who turns
Mhm.
out right when I started at the LA Times was when he announced that he was going to be running for governor of California in this attempt to recall California Governor Gavin Newsom. Larry Elder had a talk show host when Stephen Miller was a teenager in high school, and Stephen Miller would call in to his show to complain about multiculturalism at his high school and a number of other issues. And Larry Elder was just very taken with Stephen Miller because of how articulate he was. That's what Larry Elder told me, and he kind of became a mentor for him after that. He invited him onto the show pretty much whenever he wanted, and stayed in touch with him over the years, including providing him with advice during the Trump campaign in emails that he shared with me and that I was able to quote from in the book.
Okay. And tell us, how did you come to, when you were stationed in Mexico City, did you go there with the idea that you would trace your family's or your father's history? And tell us about the book, because I've been reading it, but all the other viewers haven't.
Yeah, so I did. I mean, Mexico City was where it was my first job out of college. I got a job as a correspondent covering commodities for the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones Newswires, which was really, really amazing. Mostly focused on coffee and sugar, but also got to write some stories about gold and silver, but mostly was focused on soft commodities. But I was also attracted to Mexico City because I knew that my dad had been born there, and there was a lot about my dad's childhood that I didn't know and that I wanted to find out. At the time, my father was a subject of fascination to me because he disappeared for years in my early life, and when he came back, he started to tell me that he'd been the victim of CIA mind control experiments. And, my mother always told me that my father had paranoid schizophrenia. And at the time, I just was on this, kind of self-destructive spiral where I very much romanticized my father and wanted to understand the world through his eyes. And so I went to Mexico City. That was one of the reasons that I went there, was to learn more about him. He ended up traveling there with me, and was there for a few months searching for his father. I ended up finding his father. His father had died many years before. But that's one of the things that I explore in the book was me trying to understand my dad. And my dad was the product of a very traumatic situation where his mother was victimized by my dad's father, and so I explore that story.
She was victimized by two men. Am I right? Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of domestic abuse that I explore in the book, and I was trying to understand my father from a number of different perspectives. Biological, I studied neuroscience in college because I was trying to understand the schizophrenia side of it. But then I was trying to understand, how his actual childhood experiences had affected him, and then also trying to explore some magical sides of it, where my great grandmother on my father's side was known as La Divina, the diviner. She allegedly, could see things that no one else could see and hear things that no one else could hear. But rather than being called schizophrenic the way that my father was, she was seen as having some kind of gift. And so I was playing with those ideas and trying to understand what was really going on with my father. And ultimately, I just accepted that I was never really going to understand my father, and that my pursuit of him had really led me down a self-destructive spiral where I was just kind of losing myself. And it wasn't until I used journalism to disentangle myself from him that I was able to kind of become my own person. So Crux is really kind of a coming of age story where I finally learned to let go of my father. And thankfully, journalism provided me with the tools to do that, and in a way, and in many ways, saved my life as a young woman.
It's good to hear. It's a very haunting and lyrical book, because I'm about halfway through, but like a little more than halfway. So I would recommend it. Laura Myers Casellas, who's in California, in Dana Point or that area, says in Orange County, says, I can't wait to read both of these books. Fascinating topics. So thank you. And I think earlier we had a comment from Neil Parag, who is on the team with Digimentors, who was listening in. Is your father still alive?
Right? Yeah, my dad was very supportive of me writing the book. I was really worried about what he would think about it. But he was really supportive, and writing and reporting the book brought us closer together in a way that we never had been before. I think no one had ever really just like sat down and listened to my dad tell his stories. And so for him, that was kind of therapeutic to just have those long conversations where I was just listening and I wasn't really like challenging or interrogating him until, except like in a very like loving, way. And it brought us really close together. I remember he surprised me by showing up to my book launch party on his motorcycle. I really didn't think he was going to come. He told me that he hated parties because it gives him social anxiety, but he ended up coming and standing in the front row, and he was just incredibly supportive. So that was one of the most beautiful parts of writing the book, was that it brought me and my dad closer together at the same time as it allowed me to let go of like my self-destructive pursuit of him.
And part of that led you to some of the things that he did, like, trying drugs and seeing what that would be like, the kind of experiencing in a way what he had what he did. Or
well, as a young woman, especially when I was a teenager, I did I was very self-destructive, and I tried, I did a number of, I tried drugs, and I would self-mutilate. And a lot of that was me just kind of acting out based on my pain about not knowing why my father was not around, or what was going on with him. So when
he disappeared for years at a time, and you had no idea where he was. He was traveling the world.
Yeah, for a time we thought he was dead, but because all I knew was that he'd been smoking crack and that he had hallucinations, and then he was gone. But then when I was in journalism school, he came back and he was just telling me all about his experiences, and that's when our relationship began to change and take on like a different self-destructive dimension, where I was just utterly fascinated with what he was telling me. And it continued to preoccupy me in a way that was probably unhealthy, but the book provided me with a pathway to like turning it into something healing and transcendent of that.
I remember one passage, one anecdote where in the beginning of your journey, I guess you wanted to ask somebody a question who you didn't know, and your dad suggested offering somebody a cigarette and asking them to light it. And that you said, you remember that. Is that?
Yeah, that was because my dad took me down to Tijuana for my first reporting assignment, where it was for a journalism school assignment, but I ended up freelancing the story to an alternative weekly in San Diego. And I just was very young, and I was just kind of approaching people in like a very stiff sort of like paparazzi kind of way. And my dad was like, you need to be a human first and then a reporter. And his strategy for doing that was to like offer people a cigarette or ask them if they had a cigarette. And so later on, I used that. But that,
so, making small talk before you come out with what you want, in a way, and getting to know somebody in a human level. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And how did your mother take all this? Because they were, well, you want to read this to us? This is, I think, from the prologue. And it talks.
Yeah, so for so long, I followed your footsteps that I forgot the route back to Earth. But I still have my notebook. I still have my pen. I am a reporter after all. I have not forgotten the tools of my trade: fact-based research, the quest for primary documents, formal interviews. I will retrace time until I find the place where you became lost.
I thought that captured a lot of what you were exploring in the book. So I hope people will read it. I really found it fascinating. So I did. And since I do the show Woman to Follow, I just want to share that one of the things I'm going to ask, as I ask all my guests, is do you have, Woman to Follow is the idea of it is to amplify women's voices. So I will ask you, do you have any women to follow that were particular mentors or colleagues that you admire?
Yeah, so colleagues that I really admire, Aura Bogado at Reveal. She has done some of the most incredible immigration reporting in the country for the past several years. So I've always really admired her work, and I think that everybody should follow her. Alicia Menendez at MSNBC, who's invited me on as a guest several times on her show. She really has been doing some incredible work at MSNBC and just in general. Her podcast is fantastic, and she is always uplifting really terrific voices. And I think that she's an absolute must follow.
That's great. I follow her, and I saw that you were on her show this weekend. So yeah.
And then Miriam Gurba, she led the a critique of U.S. publishing and the lack of diversity in U.S. publishing. I forget when that was. I feel like time has flown so quickly. It was, I think, 2019. And I started to follow her work, and I just think that her writing is so inspiring and so powerful. And she's one of my favorites. So I recommend that everybody follow her as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. They all sound like very inspiring women. And I will follow up this show with a tweet about the three of them so that everyone can know about them if they don't already.
Miriam has this fantastic book called Mean, also a memoir.
She does. Okay. I'll check it out, and I'll include that. So I'll go on. I'll let you go. If you want to stick around, we'll just take. I'll say hello to you at the back end, but just want to announce a few shows that we have coming up. My next show and some other things. So thank you so much for joining me, Jean. It's really great that you're doing. You're pursuing your dream and tying it together with everything you are, and we're all going to benefit from that when we read you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Just thank you so much for joining me. And just want to say I'm very excited about my next guest, who will be Samantha Kelly, who is known as the Tweeting Goddess. She is an award-winning social media expert. And as we know from her handle, she's really active on Twitter. She's recently become Chief Communications Officer for WIDO headquarters. And she is the founder of her own network called Women's Inspire, which helps to women in entrepreneurs. This is something about my show. So I hope you all continue to follow it and check out my Women to Follow channel. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see everything that's new. And then wanted to tell you about the next Sunday New York Times read along with Sri Srinivasan. He's going to be talking to Kim Todd, who is the author of 4 nonfiction books about science and history. And that will be Sunday. And my producer, who you see on this card, is Stefan Kaplan. And I could not do the show without him, and he's terrific. I really appreciate that he's my producer. I couldn't have asked for anyone better. And he was doing for a year, he did a photography, a show with looking at photographers. And now he's spinning it around. And the Spin It Social Hour will focus on talking social media for social good. And he's going to be doing that in the new year. And his first guest will be somebody many of us know and really admire, Tim McDonald, who had worked for the Huffington Post as a community leader and is a stage 4 colon cancer thriver. So I hope everyone will join us for those shows, and I look forward to seeing everyone soon. So thank you so much for joining me. See you soon.